1% world, the most valuable thing you can take from a rival organization is not their territory or their drug routes. It is their leader. Kill the president, and you send a message to every man who wears that patch at the same time. These are the biker presidents who found out what that message looks like when it arrives. Lamont Matias, Hell's henchman, Rockford, chapter president, on June 28, 1994. Lamont Matias was working alone at his motorcycle shop, MC Fabrication, in Rockford, Illinois, when a man walked in and asked to buy spark plugs. The man left, confirmed to others outside that Matias was there, and walked back in. He pulled a .45 caliber pistol and shot Matias in the shoulder and chest. What happened next was not what he expected. Matias did not go down. Despite being shot multiple times, he grabbed the attacker and lifted him clean off his feet. He turned the gun back toward the attacker and fired until it was empty. The attacker grabbed a screwdriver from the counter and stabbed Matias repeatedly in the neck, then tried to flee through the back of the shop. The overhead doors were pinned shut. He had no choice but to run back through, where Matias, bleeding out and barely standing, tripped him one last time. The attacker grabbed the screwdriver again and finished it. To understand why Matias was targeted, you have to understand what was happening in the Midwest in 1994. The Hell's Henchmen had been moving toward a merger with the Hell's Angels, a club that at the time had no real presence in the Midwest. The Outlaws had owned that territory for years and had no intention of sharing it. When both sides sat down at a restaurant and the Outlaws asked directly whether the merger rumor was true, the henchman president confirmed it without hesitation. The Outlaws stood up and one of them said simply, "See you when we see us." That was the end of the conversation and the beginning of a 6-year war. Matias was chosen as the first target because his shop made him the easiest to find. Outlaws boss Kevin Spike O'Neill gave the order directly. The man who carried out the killing was David Wolf, a probationary Outlaws member from Racine, Wisconsin, who was still trying to earn his full patch. Wolf later admitted he spent the night before the murder drinking and doing cocaine, and walked into that shop the next morning still half drunk. When Matias kept fighting back despite being shot multiple times, Wolf beat him with the gun until it broke in his hands, then grabbed the screwdriver. He walked out of that shop covered in blood. Wolf was never sentenced for the killing. He later became a government witness in federal racketeering prosecutions against Outlaws leadership, testifying against the very club he had committed murder to join. The man who killed Lamont Matias to earn his patch used that killing to escape the consequences of earning it. Michael Irish O'Farrell, Hell's Angels National Vice President. On the night of June 6, 1989, Michael O'Farrell was ambushed outside the Halfway Club bar in San Leandro, California. 2 men cornered him and stabbed him once in the neck, once in the chest, and 5 times in the back, then shot him 4 times from behind. The national vice president of the Hell's Angels, the second most powerful man in the entire organization, died on the pavement outside a California bar just 4 days after celebrating his 40th birthday. O'Farrell was not just a title. During the early 1980s, he had run the entire Oakland chapter as acting president, while Sonny Barger recovered from throat cancer surgery. By 1989, law enforcement recognized him as the most senior figure in the club after Barger himself. But what drove the attack had nothing to do with any of that. Investigators established that it came down to a drug debt. The men who stabbed and shot the second most powerful figure in the Hell's Angels 7 times did so over money. The men who carried out the attack were Michael Bruce Tank Shepard and Aaron Jerry Marsh, both members of the Aryan Brotherhood. Both were arrested and charged, but neither ever faced a jury. Shepard took his own life by hanging in his Santa Ana jail cell in December 2004, 15 years after the killing. Marsh was strangled to death by a cellmate inside Pelican Bay State Prison in 1997. The men who killed the national vice president of the Hell's Angels were both dead inside prison walls before any verdict could be delivered. The debt that started it was never collected by anyone. And the man who held the second highest position in the most powerful motorcycle organization in the world died on a pavement outside a bar in San Leandro over money that was owed to someone else. Thomas Wood, Hell's Angels Philadelphia Vice President. At 1:30 in the morning on January 14, 2005, Thomas Wood was driving his gray pickup truck westbound on the Schuylkill Expressway. After leaving a bar in South Philadelphia, a fellow Hells Angel was riding alongside him in the next lane on his Harley-Davidson. Both men were wearing their club colors. Then a white Chevy Suburban with off-road lights pulled up alongside them, and the men inside opened fire. But their target was not Wood. It was the man riding next to him. Without hesitation, Wood swerved his truck into the line of fire to shield his friend and took a single bullet to the head. His friend survived. Wood was pronounced dead at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. A .380 caliber semi-automatic pistol was found on the floor of his pickup. It had not been fired. The shooting did not come out of nowhere. The Hells Angels had established their Philadelphia presence approximately 3 years earlier, moving into territory where the pagans had operated without competition for years. The two clubs had already been building toward a confrontation, and just 2 weeks before Wood was killed, a violent brawl had broken out between members of both clubs outside the Woodshed Bar in Woodland Township, where one man was beaten over the head with a wooden board and airlifted to hospital. The Schuylkill Expressway shooting was the next escalation. 11 hours after Wood was shot, Philadelphia Police Commissioner Sylvester Johnson stood at a press conference and delivered a direct warning. The message we want to send is we are not going to deal with any sort of retaliation. We will not tolerate a war here in Philadelphia. Homicide Captain Richard Ross confirmed that Wood may not have even been the intended target that night, and that the gunmen in the Suburban were likely aiming at the man riding beside him. No arrests were ever made. The exact shooters were never publicly identified. Thomas Wood died shielding someone else from a bullet that was not meant for him, and his murder remains an unsolved cold case to this day. Mark Papa Guardado, Hells Angels, San Francisco, Chapter President. On the night of September 2, 2008, Mark Guardado walked out of a bar onto 24th Street in the Mission District of San Francisco to confront a man who had been sitting inside wearing a rival gang's patch. But the moment he stepped outside, a fight broke out on the pavement, and by the time it was over, Guardado had been stabbed 4 times and shot twice. The president of the San Francisco Hells Angels died on the street at 24th and Treat Avenue. The man sitting inside that bar was Christopher Stoney Ablett, a full-patch member of the Mongols from the Modesto chapter. He had traveled to San Francisco to visit a friend, but he came armed with a foot-long military knife and a .357 Magnum revolver. He had also brought his full Mongols patch vest and wore it openly in Hells Angels territory. When word reached Guardado that a Mongol was sitting in a bar in his neighborhood wearing his colors, Guardado walked out and approached Ablett directly rather than sending someone else to handle it. That decision cost him his life. In the hours after the killing, Ablett spent his time working the phones calling person after person, all of whom investigators later identified as fellow Mongols members across the country. Those phone records became critical evidence at trial, showing that what happened outside that bar was not a spontaneous personal confrontation, but a killing that was being reported back through the Mongols' communication network. At trial, Ablett took the stand and claimed self-defense, arguing that Guardado came at him and he had no choice. The jury rejected every defense he put forward and convicted him on all 4 counts. They also made a specific finding that Ablett had murdered Guardado not out of fear or anger, but to maintain or increase his own position within the Mongols. He was sentenced to life in federal prison, plus 10 mandatory consecutive years. Jeffrey Jethro Pedigrew, Hells Angels, San Jose. Chapter President. Every September, the Street Vibrations Motorcycle Festival brought thousands of bikers into Sparks, Nevada. In 2011, both the Hells Angels and the Vagos MC were there, and anyone who understood the history between these two clubs knew that putting them in the same city for a weekend was not a neutral situation. Late on the night of September 23rd, just before 11:30 p.m., a fight broke out near Trader Dick's bar inside John Esquaga's Nugget Hotel Casino. When the shooting started, Jeffrey Jethro Pedigrew, 51 years old, and the president of the San Jose chapter of the Hells Angels, was shot and killed. 2 members of the Vagos were wounded in the same incident. Police later confirmed that one Hells Angels member, Cesar Villagrana, was caught on surveillance video firing into the crowd, though investigators determined he was not the one who fired the shot that killed Pedigrew. The person who actually pulled the trigger on the president of the San Jose chapter was never publicly identified. What followed showed exactly how much weight Petigrew's death carried. The following morning, a second shooting occurred when a motorcyclist was shot in the stomach by someone driving past in a BMW with tinted windows. The city of Sparks declared a state of emergency and canceled the Street Vibrations event entirely. Both Sparks and neighboring Reno flooded their streets with police for the rest of the weekend. The governor of Nevada was asked to issue his own declaration, bringing the entire city to a standstill over the death of one man. Then, weeks later, at Petigrew's funeral in California, his close friend and sergeant at arms of the San Jose chapter, Stephen Tosin, 52 years old, was shot and killed in an apparent argument among club members. Pedigrew was gone. The man closest to him was gone. The full truth of what happened that night in Sparks has never been told, and the man who pulled the trigger on the president of the San Jose Hells Angels has never been identified. Juan Compa Martinez Jr., Bandidos El Paso, chapter president. On the night of July 30th, 2017, inside Mulligan's Chopped Hog Bar in Far East El Paso, surveillance cameras mounted across the room recorded every second of what was about to unfold. Manuel Manny Gallegos walked in, found the Bandidos gathered inside, refused to leave when asked, and walked straight up to Bandidos chapter president Juan Compa Martinez Jr. and slapped him across the face. What happened next was immediate. The Bandidos pounced on Gallegos, punching and kicking him until someone hit him with a bar stool and he went unconscious on the floor. Then, Javier Jake Gonzalez, the vice president of the El Paso chapter of the Kinfolk MC, walked through the door wearing a helmet with a gun already in his hand and opened fire on the Bandidos. Martinez was shot 7 times and died on the scene. 3 other Bandidos were wounded. 3 men were dead before the night was over. To understand what brought those 2 men to that bar on that night, you have to go back to 2016. The Kinfolk MC had been formed by ex-Bandidos members. Men who had once been inside the same club, shared the same tables, and ridden the same roads. Martinez and Gallegos had been friends for 40 years. And yet by 2017, they were sitting on opposite sides of one of the most bitter rivalries in outlaw motorcycle culture. Prosecutors argued at trial that what happened inside that bar was not a spontaneous confrontation. Gallegos had walked in deliberately to provoke the fight while Gonzalez waited outside as the designated shooter. The cameras had filmed every second of it from multiple angles. Gonzalez was convicted of murder and sentenced to 56 years in prison. Gallegos was convicted of engaging in organized criminal activity for the assault and sentenced to a year in state jail before being released on appeal. Francisco Goons Rosado, Pagans Bronx, chapter president, on the afternoon of May 2nd, 2020. A Saturday. Francisco Rosado stepped outside his home on Holland Avenue in the Allerton section of the Bronx. 2 masked gunmen dressed in black had been waiting for him outside for 4 hours. The moment he appeared, they stepped out of a blue Jeep Cherokee with stolen license plates, drew their weapons, and opened fire. Rosado was shot twice in the head and once in the chest and was pronounced dead at the scene. The entire thing was captured on surveillance cameras from buses and nearby businesses, playing out in broad daylight on a residential street on a Saturday afternoon. To understand why a sitting club president was executed outside his own home, you have to go back to 2019, when the Hells Angels sold their iconic Manhattan clubhouse for $8 million and relocated their New York headquarters to the Bronx. That move put them directly into pagan territory. The pagans took it exactly the way it looked, as a direct challenge on their home ground. In January 2020, the pagans responded by driving up to the Hells Angels' New Throg's Neck headquarters and spraying it with gunfire. No one was charged in that shooting, but the Hells Angels had no intention of letting it go unanswered. According to NYPD Lieutenant William O'Toole of the Bronx Homicide Squad, the planning for Rosado's murder began as early as February 2020. The Hells Angels spent 4 months quietly putting everything in place before making their move. The gunman staked out Rosado's address on Holland Avenue and waited for hours before he finally stepped outside. After the shooting, investigators tracked their cell phones along their escape route for 25 minutes across the Bronx, and surveillance footage from buses and nearby businesses filled in every gap. That evidence was enough to bring 3 men to the door: Frank Loose Cannon, Tatuli, 58 years old, and Sionon Thongthawath, 29, both reputed Hells Angels members, along with associate Anthony De Stefano. 27 were charged with murder and weapons charges. The Pagan's president had been executed on a Saturday afternoon on a residential street in the Bronx. The planning had taken 4 months. The shooting took seconds. Paul Quincy Anderson, Outlaws Cross Bayou, chapter president. The operation had 3 assigned roles: a shooter, a finisher whose job was to step in if the shooter failed to complete the kill, and a lookout positioned nearby in a vehicle. Chris Dirty Cosimano, the president of the 69ers Motorcycle Club, was the shooter. Michael Pumpkin Mencher was the finisher. Alan B.B. Guinto was the lookout. Together, they had spent miles tailing Paul Quincy Anderson, the president of the Cross Bayou chapter of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club, down the Suncoast Parkway on the evening of December the 21st, 2017, waiting for the right moment. That moment came when Anderson took the exit ramp onto Highway 54. Both Cosimano and Mencher pulled alongside Anderson's truck and opened fire on him at the busy intersection during rush hour. Cosimano was the one who had gotten off his motorcycle, tapped on Anderson's window, and when Anderson looked up, fired directly at him. Mencher was positioned alongside as the finisher, ready to step in if Cosimano did not complete the kill. After the shooting, the crew did not simply ride away. They actively worked to destroy evidence and disassemble their motorcycles. But highway cameras had already captured enough, and all 3 were arrested within 12 hours. The 69ers and the Outlaws had been locked in an increasingly violent feud throughout 2017, and the killing of Anderson was not the beginning of that feud. It was simply the moment it escalated past the point of no return. The federal jury found Cosimano and Mencher guilty on all counts in August 2019. Judge Mary Scriven sentenced Cosimano to life in federal prison plus 10 years, and Mencher to life plus 5 years. The man who tapped on a club president's window at a busy intersection during rush hour will spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. Peter Louie, Outlaws New Zealand. National President Peter Louie, known to everyone in the club as China, had been a member of the Outlaws Motorcycle Club for over 40 years. He had led the New Zealand chapter as national president since the 1980s, and was described by those who knew him as one of the most respected figures in the International Outlaws organization. His funeral drew more than 1,000 motorcyclists who rode in procession along Marine Parade in Napier. Outlaws chapters from around the world, including the Essex UK chapter, posted their condolences online. He was 63 years old and a father of 3. On the morning of March 29, 2021, Louie was outside the Outlaws headquarters on Mersey Street in Pandora, in Napier's industrial district. 2 men attacked him. He was assaulted, robbed of his Outlaws patch, and struck by a vehicle used deliberately as a weapon. He died from his injuries the same day. The theft of his patch was not incidental. In outlaw motorcycle culture, taking a president's patch is one of the most deliberate acts of disrespect possible. It is a statement made in broad daylight outside the club's own headquarters, saying we were here and we took what belonged to him. Whoever carried out the attack understood exactly what that meant. 2 men were charged with his murder. Hemi Rapata Mehana Cahill, 29, of Waipukurau, and Belmont Sunny Freedom Eruiti Te Aonui Tauhai, 22, of Wainueomata. Both pleaded not guilty to murder and to the aggravated robbery of Louie's patch. The exact motive for the killing has never been publicly established. The man who had led the New Zealand Outlaws for nearly 4 decades died outside his own clubhouse, and the patch he had worn for 40 years was taken from him before he hit the ground. Nick Martin, Rebels Western Australia president. Nobody at the Perth Motorplex drag racing event on the night of December 12, 2020 heard a shot. That was the point. Benjamin Luke Johnston, a former Australian soldier, had positioned himself 300 meters from the venue with a sniper rifle and waited. When Nick Martin, the president of the Western Australia chapter of the Rebels Motorcycle Club, appeared in his sightline, Johnston fired a single shot. Martin was dead before anyone around him understood what had happened. It was one of the most operationally sophisticated assassinations in Australian criminal history. A professional sniper hired to kill a motorcycle club president at a public event in front of hundreds of people using a weapon that left no immediate trace of where the shot had come from. Johnston was arrested in early 2021, but his identity was kept secret by court order for more than 5 years under fears that if his name became public, he could be killed before he finished testifying. It was not until April 2026 that suppression orders were lifted and Benjamin Luke Johnston could be publicly named as the man who pulled the trigger. Johnston was sentenced to 20 years in prison. But what he did next made his case unlike anything else in this video. He became the star witness against the man he alleged had paid him to carry out the killing. That man was David James Pye, described in court as a former rebel, a former Comanchero, and now a Mongol. A man who had moved through 3 of Australia's most dangerous motorcycle clubs, and according to Johnston, had used that network to arrange a contract killing at a public drag racing event. Police were concerned Johnston was caught in 2 sets of crosshairs simultaneously. Martin's allies, who may have wanted revenge for the killing, and Pye's supporters, who may have wanted to silence Johnston before he could testify. Johnston spent 5 years inside the court system under a secret identity before the world was allowed to know his name. The suppression order was lifted in April 2026. The case that began with a single shot at a drag racing event in 2020 is still working its way through the Australian legal system 6 years later. Being a club president in the 1% world means sitting at the top of an organization that your rivals want to destroy. Every man in this video understood that. None of them stepped down because of it, and every one of them paid with their life. Click the next video to find out which organization has survived the deaths of more leaders than almost any other club in the world and kept running anyway.